Hey everyone, it's Tiffany here, and I'm back with another exciting mini lesson about color. We're going to be talking about a secret weapon in color. Once you understand this weapon, the effect of simultaneous contrast, you're going to see grays in a whole new light, and you're going to be able to get those color vibrations that you've always wanted in your painting. By playing with grays, you're opening up a whole new range of subtle temperature shifts that will take your painting to the next level. Now you might think, okay, I know all the primary colors already, Tiffany. What is so special about this? Every primary color peaks at its highest saturation at a different level. Yellow peaks at a pretty high value, a light value. Red lands at a middle value, so pretty much a middle gray value. Now blue, it reaches its peak saturation at a pretty dark value. So you can see that they all reach their peak saturation at different values. Yellow, I can really put down if I'm painting the light side of a shape or, whatever I'm painting. I know that I can actually harness yellow at its full saturation if I want to, maybe just to infuse some color vibration, because yellow is innately a lighter value. And so I know that it won't break my light shadow dichotomy if I'm putting just down a pure yellow in little bits. I'm not talking about too much, right? Because we actually hardly ever see colors in their pure form. It's always mixed with other colors, always creating versions of gray. And I always like to harken back to Edward Seago, one of my favorite artists. His quotes is, "The color you see most in nature is different versions of gray. Warmer grays, cooler grays. You actually hardly see colors in their full untainted version unless it's a flower, or something. Like we think of flowers, artificial things, right? Like a fire truck or something. Once you know this, you know that light values can never be deep blues. So for example, going back to, let's say I'm painting a landscape, I know that if I'm painting a sky, I can't just throw down a pure blue from the tube. I have to dilute it a little bit if the sky is a lighter value. I want to ask you what you think these colors all have in common. It might not be obvious at first. Have you thought of an answer? All right, I'll just go ahead and tell you, or you can pause the video. These swatches actually all are the same value. So I'll turn it black and white. You can see they're all the same value. Now I'm going to pick a darker color, blue, let's say. So I'm going to start off here, put that swatch down. I'm going to pick this color right here, put it right there, and I'm going to pick this swatch right here. By now, you've probably already guessed what these four colors have in common. They're also all the same values, so I'll turn it black and white for you again, and voila. And if I color pick, you can see that the trajectory of that color picker is going down at a much more steeper level. Because yellow is a light value to start with, if I want to pick a gray that is matching the value of this yellow, I have to go slightly down. And if I were to just go straight the white, that would obviously be getting lighter, right? So I'm just mixing white in. I am actually changing the value. That's pretty logical, right? I'm just mixing white. So that's obviously not the same value. I'm actually gradating that color. But my point right now is that I actually want to be able to choose colors of the same value while varying the saturation. And therefore, by varying the saturation, I'm also playing with temperature, and we'll go over why in a second.
Tiffany has way more premium lessons at proko.com/digital painting. She teaches about value keys, how to paint digital color studies, and how to take a rough painting to a finish. If you're new to digital painting and you want to give it a shot, you'll learn the fundamentals you need to start your journey. Part 2 of the Digital Fundamentals course has 5 instructors that take you through the process of working digitally. You definitely get your money's worth with this one. Plus, the Black Friday sale is right now. You get the biggest discount we offer now through December 4th.
This concept is really what I use to harness finding all these kind of subtle color shifts, right? So this is what I like to call the effect of simultaneous contrast. Whereas I actually learned from reading Johannes Eaton's book, when you place grays next to other colors, your eye will actually look for the complementary color in that gray compared to the colors around it. So when I found this out and I was painting my own paintings, I realized that I don't always have to think, oh, what's the complementary color of green? Okay, it's red. Let me go to the reds. Okay, now let me find a value that is similar to the green, but red. Oh, that's too dark. Let me shift up. And that obviously takes a lot longer. I could actually find temperature shifts and harmonies just within the same hue utilizing this concept. If you study someone like Nikolai Fechen's work, he does this a lot. So in this example here, I am applying those things that we talked about. So I hardly ever actually paint things like what I think I know to be the color. For example, rocks are brown, trees are green, but I always like to infuse a little bit of color vibration and different color sensibilities in. So in this painting right here, the light side of the rocks is anything but light brown or yellow, right? Because we think, oh, the sun shines on the rock, so it's kind of this warmish yellow. And yeah, that's one way to think of it. But to me, that kind of limits the possibility of colors that you can use. I'm utilizing these principles that we just talked about to get these subtle color vibrations. When I'm painting something, I don't ever think, I know it's logical to think, oh, here's a local color of the rock. Now let me see how, what colors I can put down. That is definitely a good way and one way to think of it. But as I get past that and I've established believable local colors, light and shadow, I'm starting to think about, okay, how can I put these unconventional colors in my light shapes and my shadow shapes to, push things even more. So you can see here, if I color pick colors in my light side of these rocks in the Grand Canyon, I'm putting greens down, I'm putting purples down, even some pinks. Obviously I have some really light, actually a greenish light, yellowish, greenish light color. And, there's all these kind of subtle shifts to them. Now you might think, why would you put green or purple? And it's, it's not logical by any means, but to me, it adds this playful fun. Now for the shadow side, you can see as well, all these colors right here, yeah, they're grays, but they are harmonious grays, right? So you can see I'm putting something that feels kind of cool here. Now it feels blue, but I'm actually not even in the blues. I'm actually more in kind of more in the warmer zone right here, right? Here we have some warms, we have some slight, purplish grays. And so I'm actually, you can see if I color pick, I actually haven't shifted anywhere to the blues. It's all in this warm hue zone. But what happens when I start picking a more desaturated, orangey, burnt sienna color is taking on that complementary color of blue, and therefore it feels cooler. This gouache painting I did, again, I'm not thinking conventionally in terms of what color rocks are. Yes, that's a starting point. I like to start off from a more neutral base and build up layers of saturation slowly so that I don't go overboard. So I hardly start off, with bright, by bright I mean saturated colors. I like to start off with a more neutrally toned canvas, and I will build up my grays first, and then I will build up and slowly increase saturation, push, and find areas to push when I need to. I wanted to see how much little pops of color I could push while still maintaining a very simple value structure. You see, when I turn it black and white, it's pretty simple. This darker gray for the shadow, and then I use the water as a separator. So I use the water as a lighter value to separate and provide layers of value so that they don't meld together too much. But obviously the wave is the lightest value because I want to bring your eye there with the areas of highest contrast. But the water, the sky, yeah, obviously they're different values, but it's not super high contrast. But when you turn it back into color, hopefully you see these subtle pops of color. And so I'm utilizing, again, the same concepts. You can see here yellow, I'm actually more saturated. See how that jumped to the right, meaning it's more saturated? Because yellow is a light value, and since I'm painting the light side of these rocks that are in the light, meaning they're not in shadow, I can afford to use a more saturated, more intense yellow because I know that yellow lies at a lighter value. In fact, if I mixed white like this, it might actually feel too pale. You see, now that stands out too much, right? So then I adjust. And I go, okay, let's bring it back to the right. That could work, right? Little flicks of that could work. I mean, there's millions of different ways you could pair color. So that's what I'm thinking. And, you can see here as well, another gouache painting I did. I could afford to pull saturation in this boat, even though this boat is in shadow. Now, I'm being very clear what's in my shadow and what's in my light. I can't stress how important that is. Because oftentimes if you're not clear, then yeah, you're going to start throwing colors down that are maybe too saturated, maybe not saturated enough in the light, maybe too saturated in the shadow, or vice versa. And then your painting will actually lack readability that way too, or excitement. So in this case, because I know that this turquoise starts at a darker mid value, I know that I could afford to just make it a little bit darker while keeping its relative vibrancy and putting it down there. Now, if I grade it down too much, And I thought, oh, all shadows are gray. So therefore, I really, really need to gray this down. I can't put, you see how dull that would look, right? I'm losing that vibrancy, but I can afford now to put a vibrant dark color because shadows are darker and I can really utilize the value of that cobalt turquoise. When you go from yellow to purple, if you have a painting that's predominantly purple, any of those grays will actually feel warmer. Whereas you have a painting that's predominantly warmer, any grays you put down might give a really nice relief of cooler tones. When you're graying down green, that grayer green is actually warmer in temperature. So I'm trying to debunk these things of like grays are always cooler, they're always muddy, they're always gross, blah, blah, blah. They're actually so powerful, right? Because they offer this relief in these more saturated colors that you can put down. Because I want to emphasize again that grays are made from mixing all the primaries together. And therefore they have a little bit of all the primary colors and they tie everything together. So going off of everything we just learned, let's look at these paintings done by my friend Francis. I love these paintings because, you know, they obviously feel kind of monochromatic, but when you dive into them more, there's actually such a beautiful shift in color variation, and that actually utilizes what we talked about. So as you can see in the foreground, it's predominantly warm, right? But if I color pick some parts that feel cooler, they start to feel like green, you'd be surprised to find that they are nowhere near green. As in, I haven't actually gone here and been like, oh, let me put down green. I've actually just still stayed in this hue domain of this orangey red, and it's just a desaturated red. But because, like we just talked about before, this desaturated red is actually closer to its complement green. So any of these desaturated notes start to feel cooler, and it provides this really nice pop of vibration, right? You can sense it, it's exciting. What I also like is that these cooler tones, these upward facing planes in shadow facing the sky, feel cooler. And all he did was pick a more desaturated red, because desaturated red, you're actually also putting down a cooler temperature because green is a cooler color, right? So all these upward facing planes, you get these cooler tones, but in the shadow, he's actually popping that bounce light. Now, bounce light's never going to be this saturated. If he had put that, it doesn't make sense because bounce light can never be that strong, because the light's bouncing up again, it gets weaker every time it has to bounce back, right? Back and forth. So this is still, I like to say, it's kind of in the middle, not super saturated either. But next to all these grayer colors, you can see when I'm color picking, I'm jumping more to the left, right? There, I jumped really a lot to the left. So monochromatic studies can be a really powerful way to study temperature shifts, also practicing your skill of picking the right value for shadow and light. There's a lot of things you can practice with monochromatic studies, or just keeping it kind of analogous, like reds and oranges. So you're kind of staying in that similar warm range, but still playing with this whole playground right here. Here's another one that he did. There's dots because I stole these from his Instagram. But here again, what I find really interesting is, yeah, he's shifting kind of between these blues and these greens. It's very simple, black and white. It's clear what's in the shadow and what's in the light. But let's zoom in a little bit. And you can see that in the shadow, it's kind of a mid value. So if I were to drag this right across, you can see that it's kind of a light value, but it's not super saturated. And it's not super gray. There's still some color to it. You can see that here, we've jumped up a little bit more saturated, up to the top right. So as I move to the right, I'm bringing in a little bit of saturation. That's how I think of it. So you get these little specks, almost like these little kisses of saturation. And then here on the light side, what he did was, that's actually straight up gray, but you can see in the hue, it's still in the blues, right? So you can see I color picked that area right there, and it's just a desaturated blue, but it already feels kind of orangey, right? It feels like it has these hints of orange because this whole painting is predominantly blue. Your eye is searching for that complementary color. So I can kind of color pick it here as well. All these feel slightly warmer, but I'm not going to the oranges by any chance. Here you can see that, these are all pretty gray colors on the road. But then I love these really, really subtle pops. You can see how we went from here. Just watch the eye picker, color picker, and then you jump up to the right. That's a big jump. That's already enough to have your eye catch these subtle shifts in saturation. It's the same value. It's not jarring. If it was a different value, it would be pretty jarring, right? Here's another example where there's actually literally complementary contrast being used, as in There's these greens and blues and these oranges. Also warm, cool contrast being used, which is actually a contrast talked about by Johannes Eaton. But you can see here in the background, because it's grayer, it feels warmer, just a tinge. I'm talking about really subtle hints. This feels cooler in the foreground, so we actually get cooler and warmer. And then I just love these graphic pops of, literally orange. So now we have changed the hue to the complementary color. And I just love these slight brushes of, texture in the back and such like that. It's so cool to be able to use these colors to your advantage. Not only these colors are special, but these colors are special. Again, because you are playing with temperature and now opening up a whole new world of color. In this example by Edward Seago, who's one of my favorite artists, everything's in shadow. And so the value's not going to shift that much. So I'm just going to color pick all the colors in the shadow just to see where they lie. They all are slightly different. Some get really gray. Some get a little bit warm. But if I turn them black and white, they're all relatively the same value. So they're all being adjusted to create cohesive value structure. Now, in this painting by Michael Soptorik, I believe it was a concept art for Intergalactic. And this is kind of something very different from what I've shown. For example, Edward Seago was very harmonious grays, more muted colors. Now, this is kind of the opposite side of that spectrum, where it's very vibrant, very saturated. But if I turn it black and white, the value structure is clearly still there, right? So maybe you're thinking, but Tiffany, I thought as things recede into the distance, things get more gray and more atmospheric, which is realistically true, yes. But this painting is, it's more pushed. So in the foreground, we have these deep blues and we have these purples, and we're using these blues and violets because we already established before that blues and violets are the colors that reach their highest saturation at a really dark value. So we can use these deep blues and these deep purples, right? And this is in shadow and this is in light. So the light's kind of coming from somewhere in the top right because these planes are being lit. Now, as we go in the distance, we've kind of moved up towards the pink. So we went from these colors down here to kind of up here, right? So up here, I can still kind of use a relatively high saturation. Notice how I'm not here, but here, because this pinkish magenta color already has a lighter value than those blues and those violets. So I can technically use them in the midground and the background. Now in the very background, you can see here, we've jumped to the top left. So we're mixing white in right here. The sky, we're mixing, a little bit of white. It's lighter for sure than this silhouette of buildings right here. And this painting is opposite. I love paintings like this because this is actually not how my brain thinks. I don't actually naturally think in super bold, saturated color. But I like that this painting is predominantly more saturated colors, but then you still have these grays to give areas of rest. So the top facing planes facing the sky are kind of these more desaturated purples, which actually, funny enough, feel warmer than some of these blues. So they're kind of a little bit more, because desaturated would go a little bit more to the oranges, right? But they give a nice rest. The sky also has some nice desaturated pastel colors as well. When you're mixing white, you're kind of creating pastel colors. So yeah, I just wanted to use this as an example of how you can still build up a painting using a lot of saturation, but there is still some grays. There is still some hidden grays just all around, but the value structure is still very much there and very much organized. So in summary, I hoped that you got a few takeaways from this. First, learning the importance of understanding at what value colors reach their peak saturation at, because knowing that is important so that you have a starting point for how to adjust colors. Now, you don't need to memorize it for T to T, but just understanding the relationships between them. The second takeaway is understanding how, when you desaturate a certain color, you're not always just graying it down and making it boring, or you're not always just cooling down a color and it's not always just muddy, right? There's so much potential you can use with desaturated color because, one, you are shifting the temperature of that color as well. So again, I'm desaturating a yellow, that desaturated yellow will actually feel cooler. But if I'm desaturating a green, that grayish green will actually feel warmer because of simultaneous contrast, because your eye wants to search for that complementary color. I do this all the time for painting shadow colors of buildings. If I want to actually get a little bit of bounce light, even just desaturating a blue sometimes will get the feel of subtle bounce light. And if I want to push it more, then yes, I will go to some oranges and I'll just push that a little bit more. I get that beautiful orange bounce light that you see in animated movies. The third takeaway, don't be afraid now to use those grays, right? Understanding how color travels, building up your painting sometimes on a basis of grays. If you have trouble picking colors or you have trouble understanding relationships, what I would do is try to build up your painting, starting off with more desaturated colors and then seeing how you can build more pops of saturated color on top. Doing master studies really helps. I'm a big fan of master studies, film studies, monochromatic studies, maybe complementary color studies where you're limiting yourself to 2 colors. All that will really help you understand the realm of color even more.
Our Digital Painting Fundamentals course is your guide to starting digitally. We cover the basics that everyone should know, we make the technical stuff fun and understandable, and then go into the theory you need to paint well digitally. And we brought in a bunch of pro artists to teach what applies most in the art industry. If you want to learn the digital basics and how the pros actually apply them, go to proko.com/digitalpainting.